Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today's session will begin shortly. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, and welcome to the Air Pharma webinar. This year, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the October events have been replaced by a series of 6 events. The Air Pharma is the first one as kicking off this series, which will last until October 15th. My name is Andrea Gruber, Head of Special Cargo at IATA, and I will be your host today. This webinar will focus on the industry's readiness and preparedness to manage globally temperature control supply chain and discuss how to meet the upcoming demand in vaccines, health, and humanitarian supplies by a call to action. I'm joined today by a number of speakers that will provide their perspective and expectation, share the supply chain challenges, as well as the lessons learned. And especially to ensure how to meet and manage globally a temperature control supply chain, and how we can work together that will enable us to have a better future. We'll go through each of the speakers one at a time, and then we'll enter an interactive session, questions and answer. Before we start this session, just a few housekeeping information. Microphones have been muted. The webinar is actually recorded and will be made available afterwards, including the PowerPoint slides on the IATA website. We would like this webinar to be interactive, so please submit your questions using the question box and specify to whom your question is addressed. In addition, I would like to draw your attention to this very important slide. This webinar is conducted under competition law compliance, so when you submit your question, and if there are some that will not be in, we will not be in a position to answer, this would be the reason why. So here's the agenda for today, and I really want to thank all the presenters today and to thank you for taking the time to attend this session out of your schedule and allowing us to look into this very important matter. This remains a very challenging time for the industry, in particular, but not limited to the impact on special cargo and the logistic thereof. We want to hear from industry experts, but we want also to hear from you, so we've allocated lots of time for questions and answers. As you can see, the biographies are available on the IATA website. So to start right away, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Glyn Hughes from IATA, our Global Head of Cargo. And Glyn will give us some insight in the state of the air cargo industry. I'm handing over to you, Glyn.
Great, thank you very much, Andrea. And it gives me great pleasure to add my welcome to all of our participants today. Next slide, please. I'm just going to take a few minutes to actually just run through some of the key statistical bits of data that the IATA chief economist and the various teams are following. And I think this particular slide is the one that is probably most stark or most evident in terms of the impact that COVID-19 has had on aviation. As we can tell from the red line, the passenger drop in volumes has just been phenomenal. And in fact, we've seen a year-over-year reduction of about 70, in fact, greater than that in many trade lanes around the world, or many transport supply chains. From the cargo side, has seen a drop, but we're actually showing a drop of a much lesser number, particularly because of the role that air cargo has played in terms of moving PPE and other key items throughout the crisis. In fact, the drop has been pretty similar to that which we saw in the global financial crisis of 2008-2009. When you consider that aviation has seen a reduction in revenues of over $400 billion, and the industry is going to lose in excess of $84 billion this year, the cargo industry has been very much a lifeline, not just for society, but also for the aviation industry. Next slide, please. It was good to see that there has been a little bit of a bounce back. And when you actually see or look below that, you see that the actual recovery is somewhat inconsistent throughout the various key trade lanes throughout the global network. When you look at North Atlantic, you still see a reduction of about 30% year over year, whilst the Pacific, Trans-Pacific in particular, has actually seen an increase of volumes versus last year. And this is predominantly driven by the fact that the US economy didn't close down as much as many of the others, and the demand for imported goods from Asia, in particular China, has actually been accelerating throughout this period. Next slide, please. But one of the key challenges that the industry has really had to tackle, which is the capacity side. And we can see here from the red line that freighter utilization is running at an all-time high, whereas the blue line reflects the amount of aircraft, passenger in particular, which has actually been grounded as a result of the restrictions that were imposed on travel. And you can actually see the slight increase, or in fact the increase that has been experienced in the last 3 or 4 months, predominantly is where passenger aircraft have actually been allocated for cargo-only operations. And at the peak, we saw over 2,300 passenger aircraft deployed in a cargo-only operational environment. That alone, together with the freighter utilization, has really been able to capture much of the demand that has continued to be present for PPE. Next slide, please. From a perspective of where next, one of the key areas that we track is the Purchase Managers Index, the PMI, where you see the dotted line at 50 is really indicative of where the industry would anticipate neither growth nor contraction, is at that 50 point. So where you see the lines dip below that, that would be indicative of a contraction in the global economy. And where it exceeds that, you would expect to see a growth. Now, you can actually tell that when the major economic shutdowns occurred in the April-May timeframe, economic activity almost ground to a halt. But there has been a dramatic bounce back since, and this actually does bode well as we go through potentially a more challenging winter period with continuing travel restrictions operating or existing in many parts of the world. But certainly as economies start to reopen, it's actually quite a positive sign. Next slide, please. But of course, there is one further significant challenge that the industry is going to have to prepare for, and I think that's most relevant for the discussions that this particular webinar is going to be conducting in the next hour and a half, which is how the industry and how the world prepares for vaccinating the entire planet. And when you consider that the vaccine will need to be transported to touch over 200 countries and territories around the planet, potentially vaccinating nearly 8 billion people, it will be unprecedented in terms of the challenge that will be experienced for the logistical supply chain. And the key word that we actually focus on here is collaboration. We've been working with a number of entities and we've been calling on a number of governments to start that collaborative preparation now because of the sheer scale, the magnitude, and the need for 100% safety and 100% security and quality with regards to that ultimate distribution. So it really gives me great heart to see the various speakers that's going to be on the agenda for today, because it is imperative that that collaboration includes humanitarian agencies, manufacturers, supply chain partners, airports, associations, governments in particular, freight forwarders, everybody that's involved in the logistical supply chain will need to come together with a common purpose in order to help, as we say, vaccinate the world. So with that, Andrea, I will pass back to you, and I'm very interested and very much looking forward to the great array of speakers that you've got lined up. And I look forward to seeing some of the interactive questions. And with that, I wish you all a safe period of time and a good session today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Thank you for that. We have received a number of questions and information about the screens being cut. It's been taken care by our team, so sorry about that. I think just to bounce back on what Glenn was saying, collaboration is indeed key. This is really insightful information, and it really sets the scene for what we'll be move into next. IATA has called for increased collaboration and as well as cooperation and communication, which are key to ensure the continued flow of life science supplies and to move the vaccines around the planet in a safe, secure, and controlled environment. More than ever, will supply chain stakeholders have to share information because of the levels of uncertainty, such as where and how the vaccines will be manufactured, as well as where from, where to, and how this will be secured and transported. Looking at health solutions, we've engaged with the IFPMA, the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Association. And our next two speakers, member of the IFPMA, will provide the manufacturer's perspective in terms of logistical challenges and opportunities. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Luis Roman, Vice President Global Delivery Janssen from the Janssen Pharmaceutical Companies of Johnson & Johnson. Luis is responsible for the end-to-end delivery at all Janssen products. He is member of the Global Delivery Leadership Team and of the Global Janssen Supply Chain Leadership Team. Thank you for joining, Luis, and I'm handing over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone on the line. Very excited to have a conversation today, and more importantly, see all the topics that are on the agenda. So looking forward to both sort of my couple of slides, but more importantly, all the information that we're going to share and what we've deemed one of the most unprecedented times in history in terms of how we're proceeding forward with both our COVID-19 vaccine and more importantly, the logistics behind that. Next slide.
Yes, Roman, just we need to just change the format of the presentation. So
okay,
just hold on with me so everyone
okay.
can see all your slides, and that's very important. So just hold on. Sorry for this short interruption, but I'd rather ensure that everyone has the right format. And we'll ensure to have as well. Don't hesitate to put your questions forward into the chat box, question box. Sorry.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay. Okay, we'll continue and we'll share the slides in any case afterwards. So.
Okay, next slide.
Yeah, thank you. Over to you. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So today we'll give our perspective again on number one, some of the I would say reflections in terms of COVID, both in the onset and the challenges, and some of the opportunities that we have going forward as we go to commercialize on an emergency use both our vaccine and as we think of the commercial platforms going forward. But before we start talking about that, just to ground everyone in terms of Johnson & Johnson across the board and sort of my responsibility. So I am responsible for our pharmaceuticals end-to-end deliver aspects, but I also wear a double hat in which all of the enterprise transportation and third-party logistics go through my organization. That being said, those of you that know J&J, it's obviously our commitment to the trajectory of health across for humanity is what is our reason of being. Over 132,000 employees and serve across all of our three segments, over 1 billion patients each day. So that being said, to get our products logistically all over the globe, it's definitely a very complex sort of trajectory, but more importantly, the setup that we have with our partnerships, our suppliers, and our transportation organizations, super vital to doing this. We have over 1,400 air and ocean transportation lanes, of which 800 are the interregional air lanes. So definitely a lot of volume gets moved across, and some of our segments, in particular our pharma business, are almost exclusively on an air basis. So that being said, I'll go into a little bit of our COVID I would say impact sort of areas and just some of our initial reflections. Next slide, Andrea. So COVID, when we sat back collectively as a group and looked at how we approached our COVID-19 initial, I would say, challenges, but more importantly, just the sequential build of serving. Previous slide, please. Serving our patients. A couple of things stuck out, and these are themes. These are not all inclusive, and again, we're just going to hit on them, and we can go into the Q&A with anything that we want to dive specifically. But a couple of things that from our end were continuing challenges both at the onset and things that we continue to see day in, day out. First and foremost, the cancellation aspects that our businesses were dealing with from airlines definitely impacted not just our business that was already in transit overnight. You know, we were looking at least from our suppliers in our logistics space, 80% cancellations in a 2-day period. So obviously a lot of shipments were stuck and immediately on our end, activating rapid response teams was definitely required. We basically changed our business model to focus on a lot of micromanaging and activating focused efforts, both on visibility of shipments, but more importantly, ensuring that our product flow continued across the board. So that's one. The time that it took for us to find solutions during the pandemic phase, and in some cases in extended periods of time, really was counting in terms of cycle times. We are in a lot of cases shipping and transporting life-saving products. So for us, any delay is not a good delay. So we did see some major delays, and specifically some key corridors that alternatives weren't identified initially. I would say on a sequential basis that we could continue to flow our products appropriately. The fourth point on here was force majeure declarations by some of our forwarders. You know, although were understood and not accepted by us, obviously, were presented, probably put us in a situation in terms of just the price increases that we were seeing on a global basis. It was not controlled at all. So for us, the inability to ship at the contractual price just drove a spiral of price increases on a global basis for us that we had to deal with, and in some cases have serious conversations with our suppliers with. We also saw across the board, specifically at the onset, freight prioritization. So for us, we segment our products, so understanding when capacity shifts across the board, the ability to segment what's a life-saving therapy versus something that may be more of a consumer-related brand was easy for us to segment. But what we bumped into was on our freight forwarders, we didn't see that level of prioritization or a standardized approach. It just seemed that relationships were driving some of the I would say the booking slot type decisions that were being made. So definitely an opportunity there on our end as we saw it going forward, and in particular, not just there, but also with some of our PPE donations and some of our movements. I think what was being prioritized and the approach in which how that was being done was definitely a challenge for us. The last 3 bullets, the industry shortage of specialized handling equipment across the board was definitely something that we saw. And the last 2 points which were our shipment of life-saving drugs to some of the remote countries posed a challenge for us, and the documentation and import-export aspects tied to our donations on a global basis were definitely at the onset very challenging. It became smoother, obviously, as time came by, but we did have to dedicate quite a bit of resources to that for specifically for some of the dangerous goods shipments. So those were our initial challenges. And as we, next slide, Andrea, as we progressed forward and we could see just really what we built and what we learned from those challenges. If you could go to the next slide. You know, we did identify a couple of things that that we feel as we continue to stabilize and address these challenges during the pandemic phase and up to now. In certain cases, we definitely saw that the continued availability of freighters and passenger freighters across the board was a stabilizing factor for us. The visibility that was being provided into both the market conditions and trending allowed us to reroute, to understand just probably more alternative scenarios on our end. So being able to tap into where markets were headed, but more importantly, the conditions within those markets offered us, just with enough visibility, the opportunity to run our different scenarios. Pricing regulations were obviously a big thing. You know, I think that's something that we have to learn in terms of just continuing to cap and put the right level of regulations in place during these types of periods. I mentioned freight prioritization. For us, that's a very touchy one, specifically in our pharmaceutical business when you're talking about immunology products or life-saving products that have predetermined dosage regimens and compliance to those dosage regimens. We're talking about life-saving drugs, right? So for us, those life-saving drugs, PPEs, were things, PPEs for humanitarian type agencies, were things that for us in our segmentation took priority. So us having a standardized freight prioritization approach on a global basis is something that's definitely a lessons learned for that we need to share with the industry. And more importantly, we need to probably ensure that that prioritization, that sequencing isn't just it's across all partnerships, right? It's across the end to end, not just the airline industry, but all of the suppliers and providers that go with that. The peer groups for shipping, we had quite a bit of our competitive peer groups. Just, you know, we're sharing consistently best practices and efficiencies, just to the extent obviously permitted by law, but ultimately learning from one another. So I think just like this forum, we definitely had the same type of approach with our peer groups. From a vaccines perspective, specifically in our initial R&D phases, just being able to look at them innovatively, and I'll talk about that as one of my solutions. You know, combining our views, it's quite a bit of activity from an end-to-end perspective. So being able to combine charters and leverage capabilities on flows, capacities on flows, is definitely somewhere where we're going to in terms of the collaborative aspect. I think Glenn mentioned it earlier. Collaboration is going to be key. I think there's not, you know, when we think here of J&J and where we are in our vaccine efforts, for us, you know, we understand this is going to be a multi-pronged solution. This is, for us, it's not a race to have a vaccine out there. It's the solution for humanity. And for us, understanding our collaborative efforts across our peer groups is a big deal for us. So for us, looking at this, we look at this collectively, and ultimately, I feel that not just in shipping, but security and all of the different elements, that collaborative aspect needs to shine through appropriately. Next slide. So for us, as we close and you leverage the lessons learned and you think of what's around the corner with the vaccine requirements and delivery, it's going to be interesting because we look at it on two scales, not just the what and the how, but really what these solutions are looking like. When we think of the capacity, temperature controls, and some of the integrated solutions, two things immediately come to mind on how we can collectively learn to address this as an industry. One, combined solutions. As I mentioned to you before, leveraging with our peer groups, our partners across just across the industry is going to be vital for us. Being able to have that visibility to combine charters, flow optimization based on origin and destination is going to be key, especially in some countries where you have multi-pronged advanced purchasing agreements with vaccines. You're going to have multiple solutions going in there that require similar, if not pretty stable type of requirements across all of the different businesses that are there. So for us, having combined solutions is a big deal, and working with our peer set to get that there is something that we're definitely open to. The second aspect is when you think of our temperature control solutions for vaccines, I think it needs to be looked at as an industry-wide need versus a peer-to-peer competition of who's at -20, who's at -60, et cetera. For us, being able to have an industry-wide understanding of just the temperature control dynamics, especially of the solutions coming in that we will be transporting, is a very I think is going to be the foundational element and the foundational limitation on some platforms, because solutions will vary, and us understanding that across the gamma of those solutions is going to be for us a pretty big deal across the industry. Then you go back to the bottom, and I think the unified controls aspect is the other way we're looking at this. And you think of cost, reliability, visibility, and security. You think of sort of the common elements of what we need and what we've learned. And for us, how we plan and what we propose is just unified consortium. You know, it's sort of what we're doing here with IATA, with shippers and providers, to maintain governance and controls for fair shipping costs, reliability, security, and visibility from origin to destination. And I think having those requirements clear up front will probably streamline, and more importantly, be the basis of as you shift from emergency use sort of indications into a commercial scenario, that will be the foundation going forward. So those for us from a Johnson & Johnson perspective are those two key areas in which we feel that we need to have those foundational aspects in place as we proceed through both this phase and going to commercialization beyond 2021. That's it on my end, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Luis. Very interesting information. And as you mentioned, engaging with the business partners, suppliers, as well as peers to communicate about the upscale projects and initiatives such as the COVID-19 vaccines that will have an effect on the space and distribution is essential in the planning, in the development of strategies related to temperature control environment, as well as transport solutions. So thank you for that. Moving to our next presenter, Victor So. He's Director Global Distribution and Logistics and Strategy Lead for MSD. Victor is, well, over to you to share the logistic challenges. Okay.
Thank you, Andrea. Can you hear me clearly?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I lead the Global Deliver Strategy and Center of Excellence team. I'm responsible for the development and realization of the global D&L strategy in global transportation, cold chain management, trade compliance, warehousing, distribution, demand fulfillment, and digital logistics transformation. So I'm here today to talk about some of the key logistics challenges in bringing COVID-19 vaccines from manufacturers to the arms of billions across the world. And because this is an IATA webinar, I will start with global transportation. So next slide, please, Andrea. Now, the initial vaccines of coming out in the next couple of months and maybe 9 to 12 months, it is expected that they are not perfect vaccine, and therefore, for example, you would have a lot shorter shelf lives, right? And coupled with the shortage of supply, I think the industry will be relying mainly on road and air freight for transportation, and this will increase the competition for the limited and volatile capacity for cold chain, which we already face today, right? And most of these shipments will be made using passive thermal protection systems with expiry times, further adding to the constraint on the routing options that's available to the industry. Now, the challenge is even greater for ultra-frozen vaccines, where we have no options on active systems, where we need to solve how to sustain the large supplies of passive thermal protection system and dry ice needed to maintain the required temperature. and the number of pallets per flights will be limited due to dry ice restrictions. For some of the difficult to reach destination, we also foresee the need to build re-icing capability because in order for the vaccines to maintain its ultra low temperature, especially if it's frozen. My second point is on the need for a range of thermal protection systems to cater for all temperature requirements from 228 to -70, and some even -80 as we read in the news. It will take months to ramp up these capability to supply the TPS, including dry ice and additional space required for storage and handling. The industry, if we do not do this on time, and we will run the risk of disrupting the supplies for our existing cold chain. We will also need fleets of refrigerated vans, ultra low temperature control trucks, lots of passive and active strippers, both reusable and single use, that come in different sizes. My third point relates to customs and regulation. Now, the vaccines have to be delivered to point of use as rapidly as possible to conserve shelf life. I will name 3 events in the logistics chain that slows down the movement of goods. 1, custom clearance, which is often a lengthy process. It could be due to insufficient personnel on the ground or a lack of coordinated fast-track processes. And then not only that it takes time and resources to manage country variations, many countries require complicated import licenses and permits procedures. The second one relates to artwork variation by country. This requirement introduces operational complexity to manage multiple SKU, and this is often a major barrier for companies to redeploy vaccines quickly from one country to another to balance demand and supply. The third point relates to the need for testing on importation for some countries, where these potency tests can take weeks to complete and release. And all these 3 points, as I mentioned above, if we can streamline and simplify, it will definitely ease the flow of the COVID-19 vaccines into the arms of the patients. My fourth point is on vaccine allocation. Now, allocation will be one of the most complex issues to be faced by governments and central agencies who's playing the role on behalf of the government. Because supplies are limited at the beginning, clear prioritization strategy and allocation rules are required to ensure the smooth deployment of vaccines. Central agencies and NGOs will have to deal with vaccine variations resulting in divergent distribution requirements because there will be at least a few vaccines available in the coming months. So the different vaccines will come with different temperature and handling requirements. They will each have different clinical profiles, meaning to say you have differing requirements on the number of doses per user. Some could be 1, some could be two dose regimen. They vary on the efficacy on different population group, and you have to deal with differing immunity duration and shelf life. The vaccines, as it comes online, will also be approved and made available at different times. So all these considerations that I've just mentioned will lead to more questions, such as how will different vaccines be allocated to the same vaccination site? Because that actually impacts the logistics model of this. How will vaccination site decide which vaccine to administer to the intended user safely? How to respond to adverse events when many people are getting vaccinated at the same time? And how do we effectively track and trace at the single unit level? My fifth point brings me to distribution, where the main problem is the time pressure to expand existing and build new infrastructures, equipment and handling capabilities to cater for all temperature requirements from 228 to -20 to -70 to -80 at an unprecedented scale without certainty of when, what, and how much vaccine will be approved and available. And distribution centers are expected to manage intensive pack-out operations for very high number of shipments. And if we end up with an ultra low temperature vaccine, lead time and space are needed to install freezers and to ramp up large supplies of passive thermal protection systems. Therefore, there is a significant risk of a shortage in carbon dioxide to produce high quality dry ice needed for distribution. The distribution process within the logistics chain is also the most vulnerable to security and counterfeits issues. Lastly, I'll touch on the challenges at the point of use. There will be limited short-term storage capacity to cater for all temperature requirements. It is especially lacking for ultra-frozen vaccines. -80 vaccines will be a major challenge for smaller hospitals, clinics, and pharmacies to store and administer. There is a lack of freezers, handling equipment, and properly trained staff needed to handle and administer the shot. Re-icing cooling boxes may be an option, and it has been published in the recent months, but it has the challenge of sustaining dry ice supplies and risk of mishandling what might impact product quality. Vaccination sites from a logistics perspective will also need to be supported with other supplies and kits that has to go with the vaccine, such as needles, syringes, alcohol pads, and PPE. And in conclusion, so Andre, next slide, please. Our distribution system must be scalable and sustainable, and it must not disrupt our existing cold chain operations for other products that we carry today. The industry has to work with agencies to fast track and simplify customs and regulations to enable the ease of flow, not just into a country, but from one country to another country in order for us to balance the demand and supply globally. We must collaborate to jumpstart the development of multi-client storage. So it is not business as usual. That's why I use the word jumpstart. And to develop the multi-client storage and distribution system that can cater to vaccines for multiple ranges from 2 to 8 to ultra low temperature requirements. And lastly, the industry as a whole must establish effective partnerships to operate standard processes, enable economy of scale and risk sharing. So it is indeed unprecedented times and lots of challenges, but I've been working with lots of passionate people, both within my company and within the industry. I, for one, remain very optimistic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you for this very important information. I think it'll be interesting as well on the panel afterwards and in an interactive session how the industry can address some of those challenges. But above all, it will be a challenge for them because you're adding a number of variables of uncertainty into the picture, which I think will definitely be interesting for all of us in a partnership environment to look at the different scenarios and work together. So much appreciated. Thank you, Victor.
Thank you, Andre.
Our last presenter today will be, actually it was Stephen Cahill who should have been on the call. Unfortunately, he's delayed on a train ride. So we have somebody who will replace him. It's Andrew Jackson. He's head of external supply chain services for at the World Food Programme. and he will share with us the challenges in the health and humanitarian supply chain, the lessons learned, and how we can best prepare the next step together. So over to you, Stephen. Over to you, Andrew. Sorry.
No problem, Andrea. Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone on the call. Just wanted to start by just giving an introduction to WFP for those of you who are maybe not familiar with the organization. Next slide, please, Andrea. Okay, so essentially WFP is the largest UN agency fighting hunger globally. And what this means is that we have just over 16,000 people working for us across 80 countries, which you can see highlighted here. And every year we reach on average just over 100 million people with food assistance. And we have an annual budget, operating budget of $8 billion a year, which is made up of voluntary donations. As you can see, we work in some of the most low resource and low maturity supply chain settings imaginable on the planet. And really the supply chain backbone enables WFP to reach the most vulnerable, to reach the marginalized and hungry poor. And just to give you an idea of the supply chain operation, on any given day, we have about 100 planes in the sky. We have about 50 ships on the high seas. We have 5,000 trucks on the road, and we've got a network of about 650 warehouses. And that's really taking place in countries like Yemen, to Somalia, to South Sudan, to Haiti, and to North Korea. So WFP supply chain is quite unique in a way because we are, in many cases, maybe the largest supply chain operation in many of these countries. And it's not only at the heart of enabling WFP to implement its programs, but also we make it available, the supply chain at times of crisis, to the wider humanitarian community. And we do that through supply chain services. Next slide, please, Andrea. And really just to zone in on one of these service areas, which is really important for us on this call, is an aviation service that WFP manages. Essentially the support on the aviation side is twofold. First of all, we provide passenger services to ICAO compliant standards, and this really enables humanitarians to reach very remote locations, often in geographies where the air transport market is non-existent. There's very limited commercial operators to leverage. So WFP would fill that gap by providing an air passenger service. And you can get an idea of the scale of the passengers that we've transported and the destinations and the 800 organizations who have accessed that service. Secondly, of course, we provide air cargo services. This can be a combination of charter or commercial bookings on commercial carriers. And as you can see again in 2019, we handled over 35,000 metric tons of cargo. And as I said before, we operate on average about 100 aircraft every day. Important to note that we don't own these aircraft. We primarily lease them or charter them from the private sector. Next slide, please, Andrea. Okay, so WFP and the COVID response. WFP was requested by the World Health Organization to co-lead the logistics response for the humanitarian community. The objective, of course, was really to ensure the unimpeded flow of critical items from the manufacturing point in Asia and Europe and America, and really get them to the most marginalized countries with let's say a limited voice, and really to ensure that their frontline health workers had the items they need, as well as their populations. So what exactly did our supply chain response look like? Well, I think what you can see here really is the big picture, if you like. We've never, for WFP and for many organizations, responded in such a large and substantial way than the COVID response. Essentially, WFP established cargo consolidation hubs as close as possible to major manufacturing locations of PPE, mainly in Guangzhou, in Dubai, and Liège. And that really allowed us to take product off the market at the time that it became available, and really reduce as much as possible those opportunities for, let's say, the nationalistic interventions and behaviors that we all saw back in the height of the response. It also allowed us as well to achieve economies of scale by essentially providing joint shipments with different agencies. In addition to the global cargo hubs, we also established and complemented them with regional staging hubs, and these were smaller hubs closer to the countries that required urgent support. These were located in Accra in West Africa, in East Africa in Addis Ababa, South Africa in Johannesburg, in Southeast Asia in Kuala Lumpur, and serving South America and Latin America and the Caribbean, a hub in Panama. And that really allowed us as well to give us that much needed agility and flexibility, that whenever we had stock out or whenever we saw that the demand for items increased, we could just make very quick operational decisions almost in real time, as close to the countries that we were serving. So in total, you can see we delivered over 70,000 cubic meters to nearly 170 countries over the last 7 to 8 months. But of course, what good is it if we get these products into country, but we cannot get the staff and humanitarian workers to help deliver the programs? So there was also a need for WFP to step in and fill that air passenger transport gap by augmenting the air passenger service to support the entire community. And as I said before, typically we manage and provide air transport services within country to the last mile in those very hard to reach places. But in this response, we were even having to provide long haul passenger services. What happens when you have a humanitarian worker in Europe who needs to get to Accra? We had to fill that gap. So during the COVID response, we activated 67 air passenger destinations. 38 have been discontinued as the commercial traffic rebounded, and we had over 23,000 passengers accessing the service. Next slide, please. So in terms of lessons learned, I think there's a lot of commonality in the previous two presentations. Obviously, the speed of which COVID took hold of many of our operations, the impact of the virus, nobody could really have prepared for it, and that obviously includes the private sector. So essentially, in terms of what maybe the main three takeaway learnings that we had really has just been the importance of working together in partnership. So for example, I was based in WHO in Geneva, working with UNICEF, working with different organizations with different areas of expertise, with different networks, with different access to manufacturers, and also the logistics market that includes IATA as well, giving that almost real-time market insight and market dynamics that allowed us to collectively make those decisions together as a community, which has never really been done before in this space, having the sector come together to be co-located and to really look at these problem statements on an hourly basis and being able to pick up the phone and really get real-time info. So that was something that was absolutely fundamental to the success of the work that continues today. Obviously, a strong need to have a durable and strong relationship with the private sector. Everything that WFP does is in coordination with the private sector. So working with them really to understand their own realities at different points of the response and how we can be turning up and ensuring that really we have an understanding of the different challenges that are facing us, and really finding that common ground in terms of being flexible, whether it's with contracting or really just live learning and just making those decisions on the go. Of course, greater collaboration and coordination and flexibility is something that we can do a little bit better on. Supporting that interface between the humanitarian and private sector, it's not as optimal as it could be. So I think there's a little bit of work that can be done there, and I think that this is really a springboard over the last 7 months to take forward and to build on, not just with the vaccines, but in future crises and emergencies. So just next slide, and just to finish up, so where does WFP go from here? We continue to provide global common services to partners responding to the COVID-19 emergency. But of course, we're just round the corner now from an approved vaccine. We're now starting to work with partners, working with COVAX, really trying to understand the requirements. Where are those pain points going to be? Where are those critical constraints, whether it's at airports, whether it's with ministries of health, if it's infrastructure, if it's process? How do we really get an understanding for what those risks are? So WFP, we are receiving demand signals from governments, from donors to really help look at what this potential response could look like and should look like. And that's something that we're doing, of course, with the different partners engaged with COVAX and as well as outside of COVAX, to really unpack and to see where WFP's global network, global supply chain footprint can be put to use. So that is it. Andrea, back to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for sharing this interesting information supporting the humanitarian and health community and investigating ways to work even closely together. I think that's very, very important, looking at overall and not just targeting on the vaccines, but the whole humanitarian aid, where we need the right capacity and the appropriate infrastructure. So thank you for that. We will go shortly onto the panel discussion and interactive sessions. So thank you. Some of you have already submitted a number of questions that will be addressed further on. In this interactive session, I would like to introduce you 3 panelists that will join our list of speakers. And so this session is really meant to be an open discussion, provide information and best practices with constructively sharing their concerns, ensuring the air freight industry can work towards addressing them. And the intention is as well to work towards a call to action. So today, the presenters will be joined by Enrica Calonghi, Director Verticals Global Head Pharmaceutical Logistics at Air France KLM Cargo, Brice Bellin, Healthcare and Life Science Director, Europe at Bolloré Logistics, and Joachim von Winning, Executive Director of the Air Cargo Community Frankfurt, Frankfurt's Air Cargo Industry Association. So we have the supply chain represented today, and I'm inviting all presenters and panelists to come back on video, please. Okay, here we are. We have the full panel. Good. As everyone rolling in, perfect. So if we look at today's situation, and honestly speaking, I mean, the air freight industry has been handling and transporting vaccines today, pharmaceuticals and life science products and humanitarian supplies as well. But that's not new. However, the biggest challenge will be the scale in which this will happen, and the duration also in which this is expected to last over the months and the year. And I think the different speakers today have provided some element of responses and added some new elements of questions as well. And maybe just to look into deeper of what has been done today in our industry. My first question will go to Enrica, Joachim, and Brice. In terms of from what has been presented, how far is the industry in the different segment you are representing, addressing the challenges and meeting the expectations? Maybe Enrica, would you like to start?
Yes, good day. I hope you hear me well.
Yes, very well.
Okay. Good day and good evening, everybody. It's an honor to be here with this list of panelists today. I think that I'm representing Air France KLM, so the airline part of the chain. And I think that since March, the airlines have demonstrated enormous flexibility. It's really unprecedented for airlines what we lived in this period. But I think that tens of thousands of flights have been deployed. Cargo in cabin processes have been put in place to optimize as much as possible the capacity that we have. As far as Air France-KLM, I can mention that we prioritized what is personal protection, food, and pharmaceuticals on our flights. We diverted the freighters to match needs of the pharma industry. For instance, we have the example exactly with Bolloré with diversion of some full freighters. Now we look forward to even more challenging task. It's indeed the quantity, but also the conditions, and it's very uncertain on what, how much, from where to where, and also what are the requirements. We move from -80 to +2 +8, and we don't know how much it is on what. So I think that's, and I'm looking at the airlines in total, and I think that it's not something that we can do alone. We really need to sit together with the community and understand which of us, how we can contribute. In the airports of Schiphol and Paris, we have started already this community approach to sit together, to involve also customs, but also all the other parties in an airport to understand how we can work together, assign groups, assign tasks, and come up with solutions according to the different scenarios.
Thank you, Enrica. Maybe on the airport side, Joachim, you'd like maybe to share the readiness to address those challenges and what has been done, because the airports are often seen as a very complex, and by working as a community, I think there are some good and interesting examples of collaboration you can share.
Yes, I mean, the number of companies and players involved at the airport is actually quite big. And as a major hub airport, it's not just one airline or two airlines that we are working with, but a numerous amount of airlines. And we already started in March thinking about what to expect when the vaccination campaign starts and a solution is available. So what we did in order to prepare is leverage what we achieved during the PPE peak, where we got all the players together to work on what are the capacities, what are the challenges that we are facing. And that was a time where we had airlines serving our airport that had never been in Europe before, or even shippers collecting, or consignees collecting their cargo that had never been at an airport before. So that was a very challenging time. And we used sort of that leverage to bring together all the different parties. So the main thing we're doing at the moment to prepare is, of course, counting how much capacity we have, and looking at our processes and stress testing the processes. I mean, we know that we can handle pharma in airports like Frankfurt or at Amsterdam or in Paris, but will we be able to actually accept 4 or 5 similar flights at the same time, fully loaded with vaccination? So we're stress testing our processes if the capacity is all right, and we're also looking into how can we more or less balance the load that is coming towards us. And of course, we're trying to find out what it is, because most of us are a bit in the dark on what temperature ranges we're having, what volumes we are expecting, and so we're stressing all of those different areas as well.
Yeah, thank you, Joachim. And there are a certain number of questions within as well the question box that are leading towards, what are the specifics of the vaccines, of the temperatures. And from what we've heard today is like, this is even an information that is not definite as well on the manufacturer side. So it's really a matter of continuing sharing and continuing progressing in improving and testing the capacities, whether it's at the airport and on levels of infrastructure, levels of processes. So very important. Maybe Brice, your point of view?
Good morning and
From
good
the freight forwarding
afternoon.
side.
On the freight forwarding side, yeah, for Bolloré, for which I am a representative today. The lesson learned for us was even to be very more comprehensive with the industry in terms of need and also in terms of emergency with the industry in this complicated time we had for a few months, and that's we still have. We also learned to be flexible, flexible to find solution to promptly respond to various increasingly complex scenario we faced, and sharing collaborative solution with carriers, as we did with Enrica on the Air France-KLM side. In the same time, what we did is associated the same process for humanitarian association, handling pharma, to keep same processes, which is extremely important to be more effective. To do so, we did some common hubs in main regions to serve the most destination as possible, even complex destination as Peru, Burma, Libya, or even West Africa, where we are pretty well implemented. Now the challenge we should face is we have many challenges, but we should anticipate the challenge of the custom clearance. The custom clearance over the temperature control part at destination is extremely important. When you look at especially Africa or a few countries in South America, if your custom clearance is not well done, then even you have a good temperature control supply chain, then you face a huge troubles, even with an extremely good process. So we need to avoid that to not have delays because we have different unknown on those destinations on different regions. So packaging also, it's one of the challenge. We need to look on work on the packaging of the product, and also keep looking the quality process, which will be also critical, for which we need to be all prepared, especially as the freight forwarder. So again, it's what we learned during these few months.
Thank you, Brice. Thank you for this point of view, and you've touched upon the importance of initiatives that have been started during the crisis, and I think something that we'll need to emphasize as well as we continue discussing in that panel, because there have been some good initiatives that emerged from the crisis, collaborative ones, and even potentially more direct communications that could be implemented or have been implemented. I think that needs to be further explored. Maybe and I'll take as well questions from the audience as they come along. And I think this overall webinar is not only focusing on vaccines, but pharmaceutical, life science, and humanitarian. So I have twofold questions. One first to Luis and Victor, and then my second question to Andrew. So first on Luis and Victor. There's been some as well questions, and the fact that yes, the concentration is right now on vaccines, but there are a number of different illnesses and medications that still need to be sent around, especially when it comes to diabetes, when it comes to cancer. So in terms of the prioritization and in terms of your overall distribution, how is potentially the prioritization being carried out with this as emerging vaccines versus the medication, and what's the priorities coming into the 6 and year ahead. So that will be for Luis and Victor. And the question to Andrew is when we look at the situations of pharmaceuticals and life science, which are under very stringent quality control, humanitarian aid supplies might, because of the emergency, still need a quality, but it might more stringent. It'd be interesting as well to understand how this is being set as well with your business partners to still being able to move, but being still in compliance. So I'll maybe ask Luis first to respond.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's a great question. Our portfolio outside of vaccines obviously has life-saving products. And for us, what we've been able to do is at the onset of the pandemic, understanding our capacity, understanding what our booked capacity was on a global basis was very important to us in J&J. Again, we operate in 3 sectors and 3 distinct sectors that have, in some cases, life-saving elements tied to it. So that being said, our segmentation of our portfolio was clearly understood. So when we have to make trade-off decisions, we're able to do so without affecting the most important thing, which is the patients, our customers. So for us, that's really the way we've approached it. We've approached it based on our life-saving therapies, our portfolios versus, in some cases, maybe some products that are more for either elective surgery or consumer type use. We've been able to make those trade-offs, but for us, it stemmed from having our planning and our logistics teams linked to our strategic partnerships, which were our freight forwarders in a lot of cases, and being able to prioritize and make trade-off decisions there. That's 1. And 2, understanding I would say our global inventory positions on our products to ensure that the continuity of providing and meeting healthcare needs was being considered on a global basis. So for us, those 2 dimensions definitely factored into how we were managing and how we were prioritizing life-saving therapies. Now, that being said, when you throw vaccines on top of this, that's why it's very important for us to understand the dynamic. For us, when you throw vaccines, it's basically a 6% increase on a global basis in the amount of pallets that we move. So when you step back and look, again, J&J, broad-based healthcare company, and we do have a lot of air freight cargo type moves. So for us, the move, it's much more of a temperature control capability aspect, not necessarily a capacity of availability to be able to move some of these things.
Thank you, Luis. Victor, your point of view?
Thanks, Luis and Andrea. From MSD point of view, I think we have been pretty fortunate that since the onset of the COVID-19 crisis, we started out, remember that it started, I think, sometime in February in China, and we immediately mobilized a team, a crisis response team. Fortunately, we didn't have to make any trade-off against the existing portfolio of products that we need to move. It is also reflective of the depth that the industry as a whole have, and also the relationship and the partnerships we have across the network in order to ramp up very quickly and to adapt to the new constrained world, right? We work with multiple partners, and we're very, very appreciative of that. Now, I do not see from Merck's perspective that the need to prioritize, especially from the perspective of logistics, COVID-19 vaccines over maybe our HPV vaccines or Pneumovax or pneumonia vaccines, right? They're all important within our portfolio. And therefore, right now what we are prioritizing, the need to work with partners very quickly and people in the industry to expand the space and capability that is needed, knowing that this is coming. And I would like to reiterate the word is jumpstart, because typically to build something of this scale, you will need between 9 to 12 months. But now we don't have that luxury of time. Therefore, we have to really collaborate and build that space, because otherwise we will end up in a situation where we will have no choice. Something will have to give way. But at this point in time, it's very clear there is full intention for us to deliver as much as possible from a logistics perspective.
Thank you, Victor. Much appreciated. Now, the aspect of quality, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think, I mean, it goes without saying, this is something that we're all very concerned with at the moment. Now, COVAX is working on addressing the quality requirements, but yeah, we see this as really a heightened risk for the very low maturity markets where WFP may be facilitating vaccine delivery. So you know, we really looked at WHO and AVAREF and others to ensure that vaccines entering the market are of one quality, and that the quality requirements for those involved in the transport are well understood as early as possible. And that's one of the biggest challenges we have now as an agency, as the private sector is having, looking at the procurement lead times and the need to adapt our own supply chains. If we are looking at ultra cold -80 temperature range, it's going to be very, very difficult. And we know that in many of the countries where WFP operates, it's going to be almost impossible for them to handle that type of temperature range. Now, on the 2 to 8 degree range, we have a little bit more of a higher confidence level that there is an element of maturity in some of the countries to handle that. But yeah, essentially how we're handling it at the moment is classic theory of constraints. We need to understand the maturity level of different countries. Where do they stand in terms of their existing infrastructure, their existing capacity when it comes to the different temperature ranges? And we got to work backwards from the district store to the central medical store to the airport to the manufacturer. And of course, that involves a wide range of stakeholders, from the manufacturer in Johnson & Johnson to Frankfurt Airport to KLM Air France and to WHO. We all need to start coming together, which we are doing now. It's starting to happen, and really look at this problem together. So that's really how we're looking at it at the moment.
Thank you very much. And yeah, we've seen the industry really moving towards looking at those challenges, and we've seen a number of airport communities, pharma hubs concentrating on efforts in responding to the pandemic and addressing some of the challenges. Definitely like Frankfurt and Joachim has mentioned it, there's also Schiphol, Brussels, but not only in Europe, but outside as well. I think there is a willingness as well on the logistics provider, who are also very engaged, and we see with Bolloré and other freight forwarding entities that are really looking at working with business partners to be as ready as possible to ensure secure and stable supply chains, like DHL as well, by sharing information with the white paper and delivering pandemic resilience. But we have as well the ground handling aspect, and then this will lead to a question to Joachim. We have ground handlers. You have ground handlers at Frankfurt. We have Swissport, Denata, which are only examples as well. Have they taken the lead in upgrading their facilities, warehouse, mitigating the risk as well, following an IATA-CAVI pharma certification. I think one of the biggest aspect is when it comes to logistics on an airport or on the ground handling side is the weakest segment would be from the warehouse to the aircraft. How can we ensure integrity of the product, that it doesn't lie on the tarmac? What are the measures that have been taken? Has this been considered within your community, Joachim?
Well, of course, I mean, the easiest way to ensure product integrity on the apron is book it as pharma, because most of the deviation we see are shipped as general cargo, and we actually didn't know that it was pharma inside. What we did in Frankfurt, on the one hand, we looked at our processes and introduced a reference SOP for pharmaceutical transport that ensures that no matter which airline and which cargo handler or which ramp handler you're using, there's a maximum of 2 hours of ambient condition between warehouse and being loaded on board the aircraft, or unloaded and then checked into the warehouse in controlled environments. But if that's not even enough, we even have temperature controlled transport on the apron since 1996. So probably one of the airports with the longest standing experience in temperature controlled transport. And we just increased the fleet in Frankfurt by another 2 units that can hold 2 pallets each, to a total capacity of both ramp handlers of 24 pallets being moved at the same time. And the big chunk of the fleet was the first one to be CIV Pharma certified. So that's, the solutions are there. Usually it's more a question of, does everybody in the supply chain know that it is temperature controlled, and are the right products actually ordered and then executed? I think that is one of the challenges we are facing, and then information flow and transparency about the shipments is a key element to ensure at an airport that has the capabilities and capacities to have safe transport. And in the view of what is ahead of us, mitigating the risk of temperature excursions by limiting the loss of temperature capabilities from passive shipping or packets at our mature airports. So there's as much Kelvin hours left in the packaging when it arrives at the less mature airports, where most of the probably patients will be waiting for the vaccination, and any other medical supply for that.
Thank you, Joachim. And in terms of the information flow, and my next question goes to Brice on the freight forwarding side. And that's linked as well to one of the questions that is being shared by the audience. I think you are the link between the manufacturers and the airlines. My question is twofold. The first, by seeing the difficulty and the complexity we have today in meeting the requirements that will be set by the manufacturers, do you have a way to potentially address a more harmonized way with the different manufacturers? And it's back to what it was mentioned as well by Luis in terms of the working more peer-to-peer between manufacturers to align some of the requirements, so it's to ease the process within the logistic chain. So Brice, is that something that can be considered in terms of a new way of, or a different way of being more harmonized to reduce some of the complexity? And my second point would be the historical relationship of manufacturer, freight forwarder, airline, a more direct freight shipper to airline, together for sure in terms of the implementation with the freight forwarder. But those change in relationship, how is it seen from a freight forwarder point of view?
Okay, a lot of questions at the same time. I will try to answer that quickly. I think we already did that with the different airlines, with the manufacturers during the COVID, the high COVID period. It was what we have to heard from the industry is to collaborate together with the carriers. When you don't have any flights or little flights, especially on countries where it's difficult, you need to have a collaboration. So it means that we already started having this collaboration that we maybe didn't have before, especially with the manufacturers. Before, you could consider that having one manufacturer shipping onto one destination will never mix this merchandise with another one. Today, we do it. We optimize a charter, we optimize even a commercial flight together with different laboratories, different manufacturers together in collaboration with the airlines. We did it just last week to Libya. We did it to Iraq. We did it to Peru. So that's those destinations are most complicated. We even did it with Air France-KLM to the US, having different customers to fulfill a complete charter back and forth. So I don't know if that answers your question, Andrea, but I think this is going on since now a while. It's now much stronger than before. Now we need to differentiate between crisis supply chain and regular scenario for current supply in terms of solution. It's important. It's not the same way to handle the business. So if we get a comprehensive or the understanding of the manufacturers, I think we should really go further in that term of innovation in term of solutions.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Thank you, Brice. I don't know when we started talking about relationship and you blurred your camera. I didn't want if it was intentional or not, but okay,
No,
here you are.
it was not. Well, sorry. Oh, sorry.
It's okay. I didn't want to stop you as you started.
Oh, you should.
Thank you for that, and maybe that will lead my second point will lead to Enrica on the fact of the importance of understanding the right expectations from the manufacturers. Do you have some clear or direct contacts as well with the manufacturers to understand what is being expected? And I think this is something that we have seen, and maybe on the manufacturer side, on Luis and Victor, you have some experience of sharing your expectations directly with the airline, just in matter of making sure of understanding the constraints that are in terms of the aircraft, the capacity, versus as well for the airline to understand the expectations of the manufacturer. So, Enrica, in terms of this relationship, do you have maybe some insights?
Yeah, I have to admit that at the beginning it has been a slow start, let's put it this way, because at the beginning we were receiving Excel file and say asking what is your limit of your dry ice, and we were guessing, okay, why do you ask this? I mean, what is the reason? I think that we have been able as airlines, together also with the freight forwarders, to voice the need of having this collaboration, and we are not talking about prices or anything but solutions. We have to prepare together to a big event. So yeah, preparation is key of success, I've been told once, and it's true. I believe in it. The earlier we know what is expected ahead of us, the better we can zoom into one or two scenarios that we are preparing and put our best effort on that.
Okay, and just a follow-up questions to Enrica. We're talking about the capacity, and today we are not up to the 100% of aircraft flying, which, especially on the passenger aircraft, is still a worry, and I think that's been shared as well by Andrew on the WFP presentation. And how can you see, or maybe it's a broader questions to the airline industry, but maybe specific to Air France-KLM, how can airline rapidly deploy a greater capacity to respond to the upcoming demand?
Yeah. If I look, I mean, I've read in the last weeks a lot of announcements from all airlines saying that they are ready to the upcoming event. I don't think that is just a slogan to make advertisement, but a really strong belief that it's a position, it's a promise that airlines will do their part in this social responsible environment. I think that many airlines set up a task force that involves also their network department, and the question is how fast, the question to our network department is how fast we can deploy greater capacity. So the sooner we know the flows, the better it is, because aircraft that are parked a long distance, they need a little bit of time before they are returned into production. So, but I think that we are now in a momentum and say, okay, we know more or less what is coming, and we will make sure that we have cargo flights only available in the fleet.
Thank you very much. And I'm conscious about the time and with the number of questions that have not been answered. And I still have a number of questions for all of you. But unfortunately, we wouldn't have enough time to get through of them. We'd probably be here for another couple of hours. So if we're going through that topic, and it's a never-ending topic because we are every day learning something new from each other, and that's the most important part of it. So I'd just like to take the last minutes first to maybe having a last word from all of you, from the different panelists, and looking at, you know, what would you like the audience to take away from today? What are the key message you would potentially want from your area you represent, or maybe a wish you would like to share? So if I can, I'll let you couple of seconds think about that, but really, what's the takeaway for the audience from all of you? So shall I start randomly? Okay, I'll start with Enrica. You're next to me, so and then we'll go through the different panelists.
So I really hope that this period teaches us that collaboration is really the key word. That we have to talk and we have to share experience and work together.
Thank you, Enrica. Joachim?
Well, a message probably would be that Frankfurt is ready, and we encourage everybody on the receiving ends or other transit points to cooperate and work together at their respective airports in a community approach to make everything ready. And one wish to the pharmaceutical industry is find out if you really need -80. I mean, -50 is fine, I hope, because then we have some advanced passive packaging that doesn't need dry ice, and that's where we're concerned, the amount of dry ice.
And this is, I think, exactly what is important, is to understand how can we mitigate the different situations by potentially applying different solutions. So, and this is important to understand what would be the constraint on one side and the risk on the other side, and see what is feasible in those scenarios. Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, thank you. I think really just to echo the words from Glyn in his opening presentation, that we all need to come together and solve for this, and we have a common purpose to vaccinate the world. So I know that for all of us on the panel and those of you on the call, we know that the air market will be tightly constrained for years to come. There's going to be extreme market and political dynamics that you'll all be facing. We'll be facing them too in different ways. But really just a call for the continued excellent effort so far in making assets or support or information available. Please do keep that humanitarian principle in mind with whatever comes next. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Brice?
I think what we have learned is to work together, so we should continue doing it. In the next months, I think a hard period is coming, not only for the COVID vaccines, but in terms of health environment. So collaboration is a key, not only in Europe or in Asia or in America, but also in those regions which are maybe more difficult, like in Africa, join our force like we do in Africa in terms of warehousing, using the carrier warehouse or the freight forwarder warehouse, or even other warehouses as we do at the moment, and we started to do that. So collaborations with the industry to find solutions and be innovative, I think it should be the key event. It will be difficult, and we also need the manufacturers, the laboratory, all the industry to be part of all the efforts. Again, it's a different period.
Thank you, Brice. Luis?
Yes, no, on our end, I think just probably the industry realizing that it's going to be really a multi-pronged solution. So you're going to have multiple platforms of vaccines out there, and when you think of us at 2 to 8 and then someone maybe at -60, -80, that there are, but the agility and flexibility needed to manage these solutions needs to be there. I think as product flows are being finalized by vaccine manufacturers into countries, I think the information sharing, the collaborative aspect of finalizing going into these countries and understanding capacity requirements, temperature requirements, et cetera, is going to be vital. And for me, I have to stress that those strategic partnerships that are driving agility, flexibility, and just a moving element to all of this is what's going to be needed. I think we're all in it together. I think transparency and information flow, I think is progressive, right? Because you're trying to do something that takes 5 years in a year. And so ultimately, these are part of sort of the dynamics that we're dealing with. So understanding that agility that's needed and the resilience, right? It's going to continue, and it'll probably be throughout sort of the next couple of months / years. But ultimately, looking forward to working with the industry together on this.
Thank you, Luis. Victor?
So I would say if there's one thing for takeaway is the acceptance of the ambiguity and the uncertainty of the situation that we're facing. A lot of times it does get very frustrating because the news that we get, information that we get is changing day by day. But it is what it is, right? Therefore, it is important to remain very agile in how we respond and adapt to as the situation changes. And I always tell my team, this is not a time where you wait for the perfect solution before you act. We need to be very agile. As long as we can get something done, break it up into many small problems, start solving one problem at a time, be very agile. I think we will get there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think this leads to a final conclusion and a call to action, actually. I very much appreciate all the information that has been shared today from our different panelists. And if you allow, I'll just take just 1 or 2 additional minutes to look into the next step and what are the actions to be taken. I mean, we have seen from what has been shared today that there is no new normal or next normal, or using the phrase, this is the way you used to do it. The industry will not get back to where it was. It's really the time to think differently, to do things differently, that requires sitting down, explore the impossible, adapt processes, be proactive, innovative, and courageous. The opportunity to shape in a different way and invest time, effort, and resources in our industry, also by engaging closer with clients, business partners, even competitors in a more collaborative and transparent approach will benefit everyone in the mid and long term. But this also requires a change of mindset that must happen, and I think it's a critical element. So in terms of call to action, there is definitely from what came out from today, plan, prepare, inform. The logistics will be the bottleneck. Let's be realistic. We cannot ask it to be perfect given the complexity of the challenges. But right now, it's all about doing as much as possible, effective planning and preparing together so that the process goes as well as it can be. Defining the possible scenarios depending on information that will be provided is critical. And by putting in place those efforts today, how many lives are we going to impact tomorrow? Second point is sharing is caring, global collaboration. You have seen from the IATA press release, IATA is really urging governments to begin careful planning with industry stakeholders to ensure a full preparedness when vaccines of COVID-19 are approved and available for distribution. As Glenn mentioned, collaboration is key. And IATA is actually working closely with authorities and international entities and is consolidating information to ensure industry's preparedness, readiness, and preparedness that will be shared with everyone. You can see the document that is shown on the slide. Understanding the constraint, risk, and opportunities will be a key success factor. You will be informed as soon as this document is available on the IATA website, and invited as well to contribute. We work a lot with the different organizations, whether it is as well the World Food Programme, with the manufacturers, with the WCO, UNICEF as well, in really ensuring to highlight the need as well of those very important and vaccines, and to have a full awareness of the need of the prioritization for such critical products. So consolidating the information, but sharing this information, I think this is the most important to understand as we go on how we can do it together. And continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection. This is a quote attributed to Mark Twain. What is really critical now is putting the lessons learned to good use and ensure continuous improvement. Being flexible, agile, and responsive, and it's actually what has been shared by some of you right on the last words. Understanding what is at stake and is also showing the importance of the air freight industry in the global economy. The experience of international partnership will be highly valued. So IATA will continue to engage with authorities, international global organization, manufacturers, and the supply chain stakeholders, and be the communication channel for the industry. And on that note, as well, I want to just remind everyone of some additional outreach and engagements that's happening. We are a series of 6 cargo webinars. You have tomorrow the cargo claims and loss prevention that will touch upon as well a pharmaceutical aspect, but more on the claims area. In addition, we have a follow-up webinars on the transport of vaccines on the 21st of October. And the information you need is available on our website. You can register to our different events. We will post the response to most of the questions that have been put into the question box that couldn't be addressed today with the help of our panelists and presenters, and those will be as well posted on the IATA website. I would like to really thank the presenters, all the speakers today, for the time, the information they are sharing, and it's just the start of engaging with the different communities. I'd like as well to thank everyone that has joined today's webinar, and I think let's continue the good work that has been started and is continuing in preparing to what's coming. And on that, thank you to everyone. And I wish you a very nice day and a very nice evening. Goodbye.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon, evening, day.
Thank you.